In this episode is proof that the Fed, QE, low interest rates, etc. cannot solve the problems in the economy. Welcome to Investor in the Family Radio, a podcast about learning to invest. My name is Brian Bain, and I'm your host. At Investor in the Family Radio, we believe that every dollar and minute we spend is an investment in something, and together we want to make the best investments that we can, so thank you so much for joining us. Remember, our goal here is to help you learn to invest financially and in all of life. You can always find more at investorinthefamily.com and subscribe to the podcast at iTunes, Stitcher, and the Google Play Store. And as always, if you'd like detailed show notes from today's episode, simply text the word family notes. That's one word, family notes, to the number 44222. We'll be sure to get you taken care of. Or go to investorinthefamily.com and sign up there. And again, we'll be sure to get you taken care of there also. So in today's show, we're going to be discussing Randall Forsyth's column, Up and Down Wall Street column from Barron's magazine this week, dated October 24th, 2016. The title of the article is The Mystery of the Lost Workers. And we're going to be covering a topic that is of great interest to me because I love it when people address real deep issues to real problems. So often when we hear conversations about the economy, it's all dollars and cents. It's all numbers and statistics, and believe me, I'll be way up in the front of the line in the value those can bring, because having data helps us understand the reality of big, massive things like our economy, and therefore we can hopefully make some decisions based upon that data. I'm even going to share data in this podcast that hopefully will be helpful. But when it comes to solving these problems, it's not all about dollars and cents, which comes to our first issue with central bankers and the old adage that when you have a hammer, everything is a nail. Could not be more true than with the Fed and other central bankers whose primary tool is money. Therefore, the assumption is that, well, with the solution to every problem is more money, right? Well, central banks around the world have spent trillions and trillions of dollars trying to fix the global economy, and it's beginning to come to the realization for a lot of people that it's just not working, or maybe it's helped a little bit, but it's not doing what it needs to do. We've talked about this last few weeks that a lot of people globally are kind of getting tired of these crisis time period fiscal policies that have been going on with low interest rates and purchasing of distressed assets and QE, all that kind of type stuff, all that fiscal policy. And so it's like, hey, we're doing all this and it doesn't seem to be working, and in some cases may actually be hurting. And so recently, U.S. Fed Chair Janet Yellen, at a speech, at the Boston Fed, she suggested recently that creating a quote-unquote high-pressure economy could help with the sluggish recovery, most notably the unprecedented number of Americans who are not only not working, but aren't even in the labor force. Okay, now this is going to be an important distinction that comes out here that you've probably heard before, but I continue to be baffled about how it's not emphasized more. The difference between an unemployment rate and the labor participation rate. The unemployment rate has been dropping, which is good news, but you have to ask, well, what's behind that? And granted, it sounds like a lot of new jobs are being created, which is wonderful. But what about the labor force participation rate, which is at the lowest point that it's been since 1978? I've got the number on here somewhere. We'll get to that in a minute. It's currently at 62.4%. 62.4% of the adult population in America is actually working. Okay, so you hear the unemployment rate's at 5%, but 62.4% of the adult population is not working, and that's the lowest total since 1978, which is before women were fully integrated in the workforce. I'm not sure what that actually totally means, but fully integrated, I guess today we're considered fully integrated, and then it was not nearly as many women in the workforce then as are now. So that is an astonishingly low number, and Janet Yellen saying, well, hey, a high-pressure economy could help with that. And, I don't know if she ever really actually defines what she means by high-pressure economy, but we're going to get into that a little bit here in a minute, when she says that that pushing economic growth could counter the lingering effects of the Great Recession. And this is all with the backdrop that people are widely anticipating and expecting the Fed to hike interest rates by 0.25%, 0.25% this coming December of 2016. I believe the Fed meeting is the 13th and 14th of December. And again, this is late October 2016. This is being recorded. And so again, Yellen offered basically a defense for going slow with rate hikes, saying that it has been the reason they've gone slow, and maybe a reason to continue to go slow with rate hikes is that they can continue to keep pressure on the economy. So again, her idea of a high pressure economy is keeping rates low and more of the fiscal policy the Fed has been enacting, trying to pressure the economy to jumpstart, for things to happen, things to change. Of course, then you get into that idea, well, the definition of insanity is trying the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Seems like that may be going on here, especially since it's been, at least 7 years or more that we've been doing this kind of stuff. So, but yet we continue. And so that's the idea with the high pressure economy, keeping rates low, more monetary policy, trying to jumpstart this. And again, the key of the problem being addressed here is so many people, not only unemployed, but not even in the labor force. And so the stronger economic growth in her theory is that stronger economic growth would motivate businesses to invest more in expansion. That makes sense, especially if they can be more confident in the future. Again, a lot of the money that's been put out there, a lot of companies are sitting on cash. A lot of individuals are sitting on cash because they're afraid of the economic future and want to have that nest egg saved in the event that another recession comes around or something else bad happens in the economy. They have something safe to rely on. And so also a stronger economy could spur more R&D growth and also could help with faster growing startups and on and on. And that makes sense. A stronger economy should help produce all of those things. But again, what produces a stronger economy? And with the Fed, when you have a hammer, everything's a nail. So the assumption is money is going to help spur that. But that does not seem to be the case, historically speaking, the last few years. Yellen also said that a tight labor market might draw in some of those workers who otherwise would sit on the sidelines, and essentially that, quote unquote, a high pressure economy would induce those out of the labor market to come back and look for jobs. Sounds reasonable. Hey, if there's a lot more great jobs being created, maybe people will be motivated to come back into the labor market. That is very possible, but you have to ask the question, why are they out of the labor market and what's going on with them while they've been out, how long they've been out? There's a lot of complexities that get into this, and this is where the article gets into some things that are very important to me because it's getting into deep human issues here and realizing that people aren't robots and there's a human factor to all this. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. We'll get into that a little bit now. So we have to look at, many people have struggled finding jobs since the Great Recession. And according to the article, the people these are their terms, who have really struggled to find jobs, according to, again, terminology in the article, are, quote unquote, the less educated, some minorities, and those with criminal records. So the long-term unemployed, the people who have been long-term unemployed account for about 1/4 of the total unemployed, which is a share that has almost never been seen before the last recession, according to Goldman Sachs economists. So basically, of the people who are actually unemployed, those that have been long-term unemployed, so basically they've been unemployed for a long time, not just for a couple months or recently, but they've been out of the workforce for a while. They account for 1/4 of the total unemployed, which is apparently an insanely high number that has almost never been seen before the Great Recession of 07-09, according to Goldman Sachs economists. And so, again, if you're not in the labor market, aka if you're not looking for a job, then you're not officially unemployed. I mentioned this here at the beginning. Back to that point, the participation rate, the labor force participation rate in America is currently at 62.4% of the adult population, which is the lowest since 1978, again, which is before women were fully integrated into the workforce. Alan Kruger from Princeton University has done a study, and he actually spoke at the same Boston Fed meeting that Janet Yellen was speaking from, that we've been referencing in our podcast so far, almost said article. And so Alan Kruger from Princeton University has found that there has been little improvement in the labor force participation rate, even as the jobless rate has declined to 5%. In other words, the idea that labor force dropouts are returning to the labor force is unsupported by the data. So basically, the unemployment rate may be falling, but it seems to be having very little impact on the labor force participation rate, which is a problem. Granted, baby boomers are retiring, so that means there's more there, in theory, will be more adults out of the workforce because they're naturally retiring as they should, and it's a huge generation. So there are some demographics behind that. But as we talked about in last week's podcast, and as Forsyth talked about in his article last week, the labor force participation rate of boomers, retirees, is actually double what it was in the 80s. It went from 10% to 20%. So you still have more boomers staying in the labor force, even though they're at retirement age. So there's, some different dynamics going on there as well. So the thing is, some of the reasons for people who are long-term unemployed and have actually left the labor force in a lot of ways has been for reasons that seem unrelated to economics. So again, let's get into this a little bit. Among younger men aged 21 to 30, the labor force participation rate fell 7.6%, basically from 89.9% to 82.3% from 2004 to 2014. So the 10-year period ended October 2014, basically from 2004 to 2014. The labor force participation rate for young men, 21 to 30, fell 7.6%. So here you have guys, young men in the prime working age of life, or one of the prime periods of life, and 7.6%, close to 10%. How do you say that? More of them are not in the labor force. I didn't phrase that very well, but you get what I'm saying. So some of this, can maybe attributed to staying in school longer. There's some evidence for there's more time is being spent in school, and there's some of that going on there as well. But there's also a lot of other factors going on. I'm not going to get into all the stats he talks about. Maybe I can read a few of them here. What does he say? Let's see. Time spent on education jumped by 5.3 hours per week, which occupied basically 38% of their time. But time spent playing video games rose to 6.7 hours per week, an increase, and I'm reading from the article, of 3.1 hours, although time watching television dipped by 2 hours to still a sizable 21.7 hours per week. Okay, so you got this dynamic that, there's a little bit more times being spent on school, but there's also a lot more times being spent on video games and a ton of time being spent on television. So you get this image of, I guess, this limbo period for a lot of young men are in, of not having like a meaningful place to devote their energy. So it's been devoted to things like maybe more school or maybe video games or television. And I'll tell you what, I've spent a lot of time traveling internationally, and there's not an uncommon dynamic that we find in a lot of, I'll say, economically challenged parts of the world, everywhere from like the least developed countries in the world, like South Sudan, to other quote unquote developing countries that are just still struggling on an economic level. And there's a very common dynamic that happens in those situations, which is significant addictions to whatever addictive substance is most readily available, and whether that be alcohol or some other kind of drugs. Because you have this dynamic in human beings that human beings are meant to have purpose. We need to have purpose in our lives. We need to have a direction. We need to have meaning. When we get up in the morning, we need a job to do, no matter how much money we have. I've got a friend who he's in his 60s now, and he's retired 3 times because he's been that successful. And every one of those times, he legitimately had plenty of money to retire. And the first time was at the age of 26. He sold his company, had enough money to never need money again the rest of his life. But about 8 months passed, and he started another business because he realized, I'm sitting around and getting lazy. I need meaning in my life. And fortunately for him, he chose to create meaning and through another job, as opposed to finding some addiction or something else that so many people do. But you have this dynamic. I'm describing basically the importance of, there's a dynamic here that's bigger than money and bigger than economics, and that people need to have purpose and meaning, and jobs are a major way that we find that. And I'm not saying that should be where we find our identity, but it is a significant place where we find purpose and otherwise. And when you have so many young people, especially young men, who are not finding that through a job or otherwise, they're turning to video games, television. And the article goes on to say that, of the prime age men not in the labor force, Kruger found that an astonishingly high number, unfortunately they didn't give the number, have reported serious health problems and being on pain medication. Okay, moving on. More distressingly, prime age men out of the labor force report low levels of emotional well-being and say they derive little meaning from their daily lives. So these are deep-seated problems. And so we have idle men who basically spend their hours playing video games And then you have a lot of others who are on disability and taking meds to ease their pain, whether it be physical, emotional, or mental or otherwise. And basically he finishes the piece by saying, and are beset by woes that are not readily solved by a high pressure economy stoked by ultra low interest rates. And I'm so thankful to Randall Forsyth for writing this article, and what is it? Kruger. I already got his name wrong. Where'd he go? Alan Kruger. There it is. Alan Kruger for doing the study and pointing out the fact that money can't solve all these problems. And whether you're looking at politics and campaign rhetoric or otherwise, money cannot solve all these problems. And obviously, money and low interest rates and otherwise is not creating the quote unquote high pressure economy that Yellen wants it to. It's not creating the jobs it needs to. And even if it is creating some jobs, what about these people that have been out of the labor force for a long period of time and are already stuck off in things like whether it be addictions or just struggling to find meaning in life and otherwise? Maybe some of those, I hope some of those can be drawn in if we do get a boost in the economy. But a lot of people are already saying, well, we're 7, 8 years into this post-recession period, and historically speaking, we're probably due a recession sometime soon again. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but there's a lot of things that could point to that being the case. So where does that leave all these people and the labor force participation rate? So where that leaves things for me is realizing there are bigger problems going on here that are only going to lead to ongoing struggles in the economy if these problems aren't dealt with. And government honestly cannot solve these problems. Monetary stimulus cannot solve these problems. There could be some help with, if the economy really does get a big jump start and great jobs are created, that could pull some people off the sidelines potentially. But what's it going to take? What's it going to take to get these people, first of all, healthy and help them? And I'm not talking about like government programs, but realizing my point in all this is that people like you and me, we are the difference makers. We have to stop looking to the person next to us, to the government agency, to the Federal Reserve, or anyone else to fix these problems. We fix these problems. We look out there, the people around us who are struggling to find a meaning in life and struggling to find work, and we help them find meaning. We help them find work. We create businesses to create jobs for people, and we help people who maybe have criminal backgrounds, maybe they're less educated, or maybe they're just different than us. We give them a chance. We work with them. We go the extra mile when it may not be quite as easy, and realize, I believe in you. We go out and we believe in people. That's my challenge today's podcast. I talk a lot about, this podcast is about not just about money, but almost every podcast is about financial investing, but we want to help you be a better investor financially and in all of life. And here's a big takeaway. Go out and believe in someone today. I guarantee you there's someone in your life right now that's around you that is struggling to find meaning. Maybe you're struggling to find meaning. Go out and believe in someone today. And if you're that person, you go find meaning by going out and believing in somebody else. Sounds counterintuitive, but it works. And if you're anywhere in any of those categories, send me an email. I'd love to encourage you and let you know that you are an amazing person, and I'd love to help you if I can in any way possible. So this is a special podcast to me today, and because I really appreciate this theme. There's so much to be addressed here, but I'll wrap it up here for today, and I look forward to talking to a lot of you via email. And if there's enough dialogue via email, we can do a follow-up podcast addressing a lot of those topics as well. You can always reach me, Brian, Brian, at investorinthefamily.com. So be sure and shoot me an email. But this has been today's rundown of Up and Down Wall Street, column by Randall Forsyth. It's from Barron's Magazine, dated October 24th, 2016. And remember, if you would like show notes or my detailed written out notes from the article and otherwise, simply text the word family notes, one word family notes, to the number 44222, or go to investorinthefamily.com and sign up for the email list, and we'll be sure to get you taken care of that way. Don't forget to subscribe to the show at iTunes, Stitcher, or the Google Play Store. And this is Brian, and thanks for joining the family. The information and opinions contained on this podcast are for educational purposes only. The information does not consider the economic status or risk profile of any specific person. The information and opinions expressed should not be construed as investment trading advice and does not constitute an offer or an invitation to make an offer to buy and sell securities.